So I've been lucky enough to work with some folks at the World Economic Forum, and in particular Dan Elron, who presented at a couple of our events. The World Economic Forum has worked closely with Accenture to try and understand where cloud computing is going. And Dan presented some really good data on this stuff in the past. He looked at the amount of adoption going on in infrastructure as a service and software as a service environments and the percentage of people that are adopting things. Very, very high adoption rate worldwide for software as a service. In fact, higher in Europe than the US. High adoption rate for infrastructure as a service in North America compared to Europe. But people are still tentative on it. But software as a service, more than 50% of the respondents say they're currently purchasing software as a service technology. So cloud computing is already a mainstream part of the IT toolbox, whether people like it or not. Now, one of the interesting challenges is figuring out what should move to a cloud. And Dan's team proposed a definition that says you got to figure out how critical is the solution, and you got to figure out how sensitive is the data on the solution. So a critical solution might be something like your ERP that always has to stay running. And a sensitive thing might be data that's sort of HIPAA compliant. So very private, you're going to get sued if the data gets leaked and so on. And depending on that, you're going to decide where it can live. If you have something that's very sensitive like HR data, but not super critical, if your HR data goes away for a day, it's not the end of the company. You'll have a very different approach from if you have like a loyalty program, which is pretty critical. I mean, reward programs for customers, they're accessed daily and so on, but the data in there is not that sensitive. It's not nearly as bad as your ERP. And so what's happening right now is that IT is looking at certain of its workloads and saying, development and testing, yeah, it's not that sensitive. It's my pre-production stuff, very good for me to embrace infrastructure as a service. On the other hand, if I've got something like ERP or HIPAA, I'm going to be much more inclined to use traditional hosting where I have full control over things. Now, what's interesting is that the adoption of cloud is projected to be much higher. In this graph, you see the red is 2009 and the blue is 2012. Most organizations are planning on adopting cloud computing stuff much more aggressively in the next 2 or 3 years. This really is a huge run-up in the amount of cloud computing technology that's going on. And this is, they were very specific. They don't say cloud in the title here. This is infrastructure and applications outside of company firewalls. So you couldn't argue that this is private clouds. This is definitely public clouds. And you can look at the tremendous amount of adoption going on overall for people moving stuff from in-house to on-demand.